Ancient Americans arrived 10,000 years before we thought. In a desert in New Mexico, buried under the world's biggest pile of white sand, there is a set of footprints, human footprints, pressed into the mud on the shore of a lake that dried up thousands of years ago. And when scientists finally figured out how old they were, the number was so amazingly shocking that half the experts refused to believe it honestly. Because these footprints are somewhere between 21 and 23,000 years old, which means everything you were taught about the first Americans is truly wrong by about 10,000 years. Think about what that actually means. 10,000 years. That's longer than all of recorded human history stacked on top of itself. Twice. Somebody was walking across America at the absolute peak of the last ice age, thousands of years before anyone thought humans could possibly have been here. And the story of who they were, how they got here, and why this discovery started a scientific war that is still raging nowadays is one of the wildest mysteries in all of human history. Stick with me, because by the end, the map of the ancient world in your head is going to look completely different. First, let's talk about the story you already know, the one in the textbooks. For most of the last century, the answer to who were the first Americans was simple and confident. They were called the Clovis people, named after a town in New Mexico where their distinctive stone spear points were first found about 90 years ago. The story went like this. Around 13,000 years ago, a group of hunters walked across a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska, came down through a gap in the ice, and became the first humans to ever set foot in the Americas. Clean, simple, case closed. For decades, if you suggested anyone was here earlier, you got laughed out of the room. And then came White Sands. It's a national park in southern New Mexico, surreal, endless rolling dunes of fine white gypsum, left behind by ancient dried-up seas. Part of it sits on a U.S. Army missile range, which is why for years almost nobody could dig there. But in the mud of an ancient lake bed, a park manager named David Bustos spotted something. Footprints. And not just one or two layers of them, on multiple levels, made by real people walking along the shoreline of a lake that vanished at the end of the Ice Age. The team from Bournemouth University in England and the U.S. National Park Service started to excavate, and what they found stopped the whole field cold. They dated the footprints using seeds from a water plant found in the layers directly above and below the tracks. The result came back between 21 and 23,000 years old. Let that land. That's the height of the last glacial maximum, the coldest, iciest peak of the last ice age, when giant sheets of ice were supposed to have sealed North America shut. These footprints were 10,000 years older than Clovis. In one discovery, they didn't just move the date back a little. They added 10,000 years to the entire human story on this continent and rewrote American prehistory. But here's the part that gives me chills, the part that turns a date into people. When scientists studied the pattern of the footprints, they didn't just see humans pass through, they saw a scene. The tracks were mostly made by teenagers and younger children, and the lead researcher, Matthew Bennett, described what they revealed, not just hunting and surviving, but play. Different ages coming together, older kids interacting with little ones and adults. 23,000 years ago, on the shore of a lake in New Mexico, a group of kids were messing around in the mud, and it froze in time. That's not a statistic. That's a childhood, preserved for 23,000 years. And they weren't alone. Pressed into that same ancient ground right alongside the human tracks were the footprints of the giants they lived with. Mammoth tracks, giant ground sloth tracks, dire wolves, yes, the real animal, and birds. So picture the real scene. This wasn't empty wilderness. These children were walking through a world filled with Ice Age monsters, animals the size of trucks, casually leaving their footprints in the same mud, on the same day, as a family of ancient humans. This is a genuine lost world, and we only know it existed because of some mud. Now, you would think a discovery this incredible would be celebrated, and it was by some. But a lot of scientists absolutely refused to accept it, because it broke 50 years of settled science, and extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. The critics had a specific attack. They said, those seeds you dated, they come from an aquatic plant, and aquatic plants can absorb old carbon from the water, which can make them test way older than they actually are. In other words, maybe the footprints are real, but your date is wrong, inflated by bad seeds. It was a fair, serious challenge, and for a while it left the whole discovery hanging in doubt. So the team went back to do something rare in science. They tried to prove themselves right using completely different methods. And this is where it gets airtight. They redated the site using pollen, thousands of grains of it, from land plants, which don't have the old carbon problem the water seeds do. Same result. Then they used a totally separate technique called optically stimulated luminescence, which measures the last time buried quartz grains saw sunlight. Same result again. Then a new independent study used ancient mud, analyzed by a different lab entirely. Same result a third time. 3 different materials, multiple independent labs. 2 research groups now hold a total of 55 consistent radiocarbon dates. As one scientist put it, it's a remarkably consistent record. Okay. So if humans were really here 23,000 years ago, at the frozen peak of the Ice Age, that breaks the old story completely. Because remember the textbook version, people supposedly walked here through an ice-free gap around 13,000 years ago. But at 23,000 years ago, that gap didn't exist yet. The northern route was a solid wall of ice, sealed shut. So how did they get here? They couldn't have walked the classic route, which forces a stunning conclusion. Either humans were here far, far earlier than anyone imagined, or they didn't come by land at all. And that's the theory gaining serious ground. Research from the University of Oxford suggests the first Americans may have arrived as far back as 30,000 years ago, and that they came by boat, hugging the Pacific coastline, paddling from island to island down the edge of the continent while the interior was still locked in ice. Think about how bold that is. We picture ancient people as primitive, but these may have been skilled seafarers, navigating open water and a brutal coastline tens of thousands of years ago, to reach a continent no human had ever seen, not stumbling across a land bridge, deliberately sailing into the unknown. And here's what makes this the perfect time to be talking about it. This fight is happening right now. It is a live scientific firestorm. Just recently, a famous site in Chile called Monte Verde, the very site that first cracked the old theory decades ago, got challenged again, with researchers arguing its dates might be off too. National Geographic literally quoted an archaeologist predicting the debate will be, quote, a firestorm over the next few years. So this isn't dusty settled history. You are watching, in real time, scientists rewrite the origin story of an entire hemisphere, and nobody yet knows how it ends. And I have to mention the wildest claim of all. One most scientists think is wrong, but it's too jaw-dropping to skip. In 2017, researchers published a paper in the journal Nature about a mastodon skeleton found near San Diego that they argued showed signs of being butchered by humans. The problem? They dated it to 130,000 years ago. If that were true, and to be clear, it is heavily disputed and probably wrong, it wouldn't just move the date. It would mean the first Americans weren't even our species, Homo sapiens, who had barely left Africa at that point. It's almost certainly a mistake, but the fact that it's even on the table tells you how wide open this mystery really is. So let's pull it together. Why does an old set of footprints in a New Mexico desert actually matter to you? Because it's a lesson about certainty. For 50 years, the first Americans' question was treated as solved. 13,000 years, Clovis, land bridge, done. Taught to school kids as fact. It was in every textbook. And then some footprints in the mud proved the entire confident consensus wrong by 10,000 years. One geologist who saw them said it perfectly. He said, "You realize it basically contradicts everything you've been taught about the peopling of North America. And if you're watching this in America, sit with this for a second. The ground beneath you has a human story that is at least 23,000 years deep, and possibly 30,000 or more. Long before any nation, any border, any city, there were families here. Kids playing on a lakeshore while mammoths grazed in the distance. They had no idea they were first. They were just living, surviving the Ice Age, raising their children, walking home along the water. And 23,000 years later, we found their footprints and realized they'd been quietly holding the biggest secret in American history the entire time. Here's what stays with me. The oldest, most important evidence of the first Americans wasn't a golden artifact or a grand monument. It was footprints, the most ordinary thing a human can leave behind. A family, walking. And it was enough to rewrite history. The past keeps doing this to us. Every time we're certain we've got the story figured out, the ground opens up, sometimes literally, and proves us wrong. So I want your honest take in the comments. Do you think humans walked here across the ice, or sailed here by boat thousands of years earlier? Drop your theory below. I read them all. And if this changed the way you see the ground under your feet, subscribe on A Life Before Now.